All right, we're going to go over Chapter 10, but before we do, if you look up on the screen here, I wanted to show you this. I was talking with Andrew before class today, and you may or may not be aware of sites like this, but this first one here is right here. It's called Udemy.com, and as I told him, I probably have taken literally 100 courses from them, and I'm signed up probably for a couple hundred more. They're all online. You can learn about just about anything you want. And what's really nice about them, let's suppose that you were having problems with, I don't know, JavaScript. So you type in here JavaScript into the search bar. And it comes up and it says, come on. It says that we have 638 courses on JavaScript. Well, a lot more than, of course, you could ever take, that you pay for. We also have 30 of them that are free. All right. So you go out there, again, people learn in different ways. A lot of times they give you source code for these things too. And some of these, even the free ones, are really good, just so you know. The other thing, and Andrew alerted me to this because I didn't know it, but if you've gotten into your account yet, if you've gotten into your account for that Microsoft Imagine thing that we talked about earlier, you get a free 3-month membership to Pluralsight.com. All right? And I looked at Pluralsight, but it's been a while. All right? But you might want to go out to Pluralsight.com. You might want to go out to Udemy.com. If you're looking for more help or another way to get this material across to you. All right? I'm still waiting. I have contacted Jeremy twice. All of the paperwork, to my knowledge, has been submitted. We have somebody who is willing to tutor. We just haven't gotten the word back from St. Louis that they can start. And like I said, I've contacted him twice. He contacts them. I don't know what more he can do. But hopefully we're going to get word back. And it's a very nice young woman, Valerie Sandbrink, who's one of my second-year students. She's an A student. She's very bright. All right. So let's go into Chapter 10, which starts in your book on page 451. You may or may not be aware of this. The good news is that this is, I think, the shortest chapter in the book. It's literally about 15 pages long. So what they talk about in here is the whole concept of web development, and they break it down into talking first about what's referred to as the systems development lifecycle, which we'll get into in just a minute, some other methodologies. Then they talk about the roles of different people on a website project. All right, and if you've got for example, if you were going to write a big website project for Amazon, you're going to have a lot more people working on it than you are for Bob's Hardware. And if Bob owns his own hardware shop, he may hire somebody and it might be one person that does everything type of an idea. So we'll talk about all that. But as they say on the bottom of the page, this chapter discusses the skills needed for successful large-scale project development and introduces you to common website methods, choosing a domain name, hosting a website, etc. All right? So the first thing they do starting on page 452 is they break down a project into different roles. The first one that's discussed here is the role of a project manager. And I don't know if I ever told you about this, but I worked for a guy for about 5 or 6 years named Larry Horsfall when I was working at Blackhawk. And he, to this day, continues to be one of my better friends. He was somebody that, even though I worked for him, he made it seem like we were equals. He never bugged me, but a lot of times he'd come by and he'd say, you're running around like a chicken without a head. I figure if you have a problem, you'll let me know. Okay, fine. Fast forward. After a while, I thought to myself, I like him. He's just a really good guy. But I don't have a frickin' clue as to what he actually does for a living. And I had no clue. Then he went on vacation, and he and his wife went to Europe for 3 weeks. He got permission to do it during the school year. He had to arrange it a year in advance, etc. There was reasons for it, but the point is, while he was gone, I realized what he did. Because a lot of things that people, basically looked up to him to do weren't getting done. All right? And some of them had been delegated to other people who had no business doing them because they just didn't get it. Well, what does that have to do with anything? A project manager, a good project manager, is an overseer. She or he comes up and solves problems before they're even noted. Have you ever seen that there's a newer commercial out where there's a repairman, he comes into an office and the guy goes, "What are you here for?" He goes, "I'm here to fix the elevator." The guy says, "There's nothing wrong with the elevator." He goes, "Yeah, but I heard that it's going to break down soon. It's one of those things for Watson." And he's checked out the elevators and said that within 3 days they're going to have a breakdown. So the idea, it's preventive medicine. All right? It's why I won't lose weight until I exercise more than I do. All right, that kind of an idea. So a project manager oversees things. They create the plan and the schedule, and they make sure people stick to it. An information architect, I guarantee you this one's on the test. They clarify the mission and the goals on the site. They assist in determining the functionality in the site. They define the site organization, navigation, and labeling. All right? The user experience designer. I'm asking, just out of curiosity, anybody in this room ever seen it's a new show or was a new show last year called Bull? Anybody ever seen that show? Okay, I've watched it a few times. What Bull is he's basically a psychologist, and what he does is he gets hired by people who, his clients are attorneys. And what they do is he finds out all the people who are going to be on the jury. He finds out personal information about them, and then he creates a mock jury. Okay? And he sees how things play to the mock jury. The mock jury are made up of people who are very similar to the actual jury. Okay? So what does this have to do with anything? Well, what he's doing is he's letting the attorneys see the experience that they would have with the real jury on a practice jury. Does that make sense? In much the same way, what's a real hot field right now is the field of UX, user experience. And those are people oftentimes who not only have a lot of experience using in IT and information technology, they may also have a psychology degree where they know, they look at, okay, how do people look at a website? What do they like about it? What don't they like about it? What turns them on about it? What turns them off about it? What is it about their website that makes it better? What is it about their website that makes it worse than competitors' websites? All right, so that's what a UX or a user experience designer does. A marketing rep. This is quite often, this is somebody who might have very little IT experience. They have a marketing degree. They know what colors go well on a screen. They know how to market to certain target audiences, etc. Copywriters and editors, this was back in my previous lifetime. I actually started my first degree right out of high school. I graduated high school at 17, and I was a punk. And I went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and got a journalism degree. I actually used to write for the Milwaukee, now it's the Journal Sentinel, but there used to be two papers, a Sentinel that came in the morning and a Journal that came in the afternoon. And I was a beat writer for the Sentinel, the morning paper. And I did tons of copywriting. I even went in and did some editing. But again, these are people who understand the English language, how to make things flow on a website. All right? The content manager, as it says, they participate in strategic and creative development. They oversee changes in content. Maybe you've seen this before where you go out to a website and then you go out to a website maybe a month later, a year later, and it looks drastically different from the way it did before. All right, typically content managers are going to have something to do with that. Graphic designer, another question that's on the test. All right, what do? They create the graphic images. Graphic designer, graphic images. All right, they can create them, they can modify them, they can find them if somebody else is going to create them or if they're already out there on the internet, etc. A database administrator, okay, just so you know, those of you, and I guess everybody except Colin next semester who will be taking the C# class, the way I set that class up is the first half to maybe a little more than half is on C#. The rest of that class, you learn databases. All right, and we hit it fairly hard. We look at a free database that's available out there that's called MySQL. Why? Because a year from now, when you're in the ASP.NET class, we're going to be using Microsoft's version of MySQL, which is called SQL Server Database. All right, so a database administrator is in charge of the database. Okay? And most companies today, or I shouldn't say most, many companies today are no longer brick and mortar companies. You may or may not be aware of this, but for example, a company like Barnes & Noble, they do a hell of a lot more business online than they do in their stores. In fact, what many people do today is they order a book from Barnes & Noble and they ask it to be sent to the store. More and more companies are doing that. All right? And it's funny, I watch Bill Maher sometimes on Friday nights. He's a liberal guy, but he's got a talk show with, I think, some humor in it. And he was mentioning last week on his show, might have been the week before, but I think it was last week, he said how Amazon announced, Amazon announced that that you can come in and pick up stuff like at a regular store or do whatever. And he was making fun of it. He said, that's like a regular store. All right, but it is. You know, when you think about it, Walmart, if you've seen those commercials now, you can order your stuff online from Walmart, your food. You can go to Walmart and pick it up, or they'll even deliver it to you. All right. So, I mean, this stuff is all happening, and a database administrator is in charge of the data for the company. All right. And since so many of these companies have just their whole persona is an online persona, this is one of the most powerful people in an organization. The network administrator is on the hardware side. So if you went over and you took a class in the next room with Mr. Corrigan, you'd learn more about becoming a network administrator. All right. This one right here, this is not on the test, but I want to make sure you at least see this. This is on the middle of page 453 in the book. And what you learn in this program is web development. You don't learn a boatload about web design. Web design are things like what colors go with what other colors, what font looks the best for a 6-year-old, you know, if you're creating a site for kids, etc. We go through some of that. That's not, for sure, that's not my area of expertise. All right, but the program that you're in is basically a web developer program. As it says, sometimes called a front-end web developer. The web developer writes HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or some variation of that. That's what we're doing in here. All right. The development process, starting on the very bottom of page 453 and going on to the next couple pages, they talk about the fact this right here, this is called the SDLC. The Systems Development Lifecycle, a process that has been used for decades to build information systems. So what do? Somebody comes up with an idea. All right, whether it's a website or something else. But if you're going to have a new company, so if I've used this example before, I'm going to have Jeff Sporting Goods. All right, I want to compete with Dick's, and I'm going to have Jeff Sporting Goods. One of the first things I'm going to want to do is probably after I start getting inventory, getting a place, etc., is to come up with a website. All right. So the first thing you do in there is you do a feasibility study. Is this worth doing? If I'm going to put out $1 million, let's say, in upfront capital for this series of sporting goods stores that I'm going to open, how much do I have to earn back, and how fast do I have to earn it back before I'm going to have to close because I'm losing money and not making it? So you do a feasibility study during this investigatory phase. How feasible is it? Then you go into analysis. You look at what you have right now, what you need. Sometimes you've got a company, you might even have a website, but the website might suck. All right, which reminds me of something that, and most people laugh at this. I'm not telling you this to be funny. I'm not. There actually is a site out on the internet, websitesthatsuck.com. And it's even more than that. This guy has published these into books. You know, talk about a guy who took an idea and ran with it and made money. My wife doesn't understand. It's not exactly a fascination, but I'll watch it whenever it's on. I watch Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives with Guy Fieri. I'm not a big Guy Fieri fan, but I'm amazed that a guy gets paid to drive around the country and eat. I find that amazing. All right? This guy does something similar. He goes out on the web and finds websites that he thinks are really ugly. And then he puts links to them. And he put it into a book, and he's done this for years, and he makes money out of it. All right? So you could look at that, you could look at competitor sites, etc. And most of the time when these sites suck, not always, but most of the time, it's because there are problems with color. All right, here's one that he's got, and you look at that. Is that terrible? Well, I don't think he likes the colors, etc. All right, so after you analyze, you design. And typically when you design, what you do is what I call the Volkswagen, the Buick, and the Cadillac plan. You come up with 3 plans. The Volkswagen plan is the cheapest, but it gives you the least functionality. The Cadillac plan is the most expensive, and it gives you the most functionality. The Buick is somewhere in the middle. So a lot of times, people want the Cadillac, but they can't afford it. They don't want the Volkswagen because it doesn't have enough of what they want, so they settle for the Buick. All right, so that's what you do during the design phase. Then you've got implementation where you actually, build it, do it, test it, etc. Then you've got maintenance. And you notice this, how the arrows keep going. This is cyclical. It never really ends. Okay, so they talk about these. These are all phases. They kind of changed it a little bit on the bottom of page 454 for building a website. But the ideas as far as what you do in here is the same. You conceptualize. Okay? Is there an opportunity? All right. If I decided, and there's a friend of mine that I used to work with, and he lives in Madison, Wisconsin, and we've talked for years about setting up a blog, our own blog. And I mean, you've all read blogs, I'm sure, but we would just talk about our expertise and our stuff that's happened to us in life. We don't know if it'd be a moneymaker or not, but it would be something we'd each, be interested in doing. But identify the opportunity. That is an opportunity. Okay? Gather the requirements. Well, one thing we'd want to know is this worth doing? If we're going to put time and effort into writing a daily blog or even a weekly blog, and put effort, etc. into it. Plus, we'd have to get our own domain, we'd have to get server space, etc. Is it worth the time? All right. And if it's good and people like it, then typically you get contacted by advertisers. That's how you start making money. All right. So then we design it, come up with a way we want to set it up. We'd start to do the production. We'd test it. We'd launch it to make sure that we'd have people look at it to make sure it looks the way we want it to look. We do maintenance where we're constantly fixing and enhancing it. And a big thing that a lot of companies don't do is this last thing, an evaluation. They put a website out there and then they never ask people what they think about it. All right? This whole thing in here should be a whole concept of what's referred to as continuous improvement. You're constantly updating and upgrading. There's other things that you can do. You may have heard of this word before, prototyping. All right? What a prototype is for information technology is it's a limited working model. So it's something without the bells and whistles on it. There's other things. There's spiral systems development, JAD, JAD, where you basically take people and you have them go away for a week and meet on everything they should be doing. Agile, instead of having a big project, you have tons of little mini projects. It's what you do in Agile, and there's other ones too. Okay, so conceptualization, as it says, and I think that's somewhere on the test, but it's determining the site's long-term and short-term mission. What is it you want this website to do? You go into analysis then. You determine exactly your information topics. What do you want on the site? All right, your functionality requirements. Is it going to use a database? What database is it going to use? Is our server going to be a Linux server or a Windows server? Those kinds of things. Our environmental requirements. All right. If we've got a small building and we want our own server, we might have to move to a bigger building. Or we might have to at least think about heating and cooling types of issues. What kind of content are we going to put onto our site? All right. Maybe we don't have a new site, but we're modifying an existing one. What do we want to do? I always tell this to people if you look at the top of the screen here, because I've had this, I have set up internships for hundreds of people during my time as a teacher, all right, as an instructor. And people say, you bring somebody in, and I always ask them, I say, what, you know what you want? I don't have a clue. Well, the first thing to do is go out and look at your competitors, because you can tell what's working for them and what's not working for them, all right? And it at least gives you a starting point. You start to estimate costs. We talked about that cost-benefit analysis, all right? And typically you do all that before you go on. Then you go into the design phase, as I mentioned. Now it says do a site organization. Back in Chapter 5, we talked about linear sites. We talked about hierarchical and random. And we said hierarchical, when you work your way down, is the most common. All right, that's probably what most people are going to do. Then you design the prototype. You want to find out exactly if the product is doing what you think and want and are going to tell people it's going to do. That is what's known as usability testing. Another thing on your next test. All right. From there, you design your page layout. You document each page. You might do it first with something like is shown here on 457. All right. Where you wireframe it or just write it on a piece of paper as far as what you're looking for. From there, you go on to production. What do you do during production? You choose a web authoring tool. All right. I had a job for a year, I think I've told you a little bit, that I worked for this aerospace company in Rockford, Illinois. All right. And one of the things they wanted to do is they wanted to go totally paperless. Everything they did would be totally electronic. It's known as electronic data interchange. All right. When you've got purchase orders, etc., all that stuff would have been automated. So why am I telling you this? Well, one of the first things they asked me to do was to come up with some really good EDI, electronic data interchange software. So I literally spent a month investigating all the stuff that was out there. And I got to the point where I settled on this company, and they were out of Detroit. And it was a good news, bad news. The good news, they were very reasonably priced. The bad news is they were a very small company. So there was always the chance they'd fold. That makes sense? All right. So what I did was my boss said, well, what do you want to do next? And I said, what do you think I should do next? And this went back and forth, but we agreed on I would fly to Detroit and I would take a week-long class with them. They had classes for business. And I would come back and tell them what I thought of the product. And it was a really good product. All right. But the bottom line is this. I chose their tool. Was it real expensive? It was about $65,000. This is a multi-million-dollar company that does business with the government. So $65,000 wasn't that big a stretch. But I had to make sure that they would escrow the code. In other words, if the company ever went belly up, we'd get the source code. All right. And the guy was surprised when I did that because he said they've dealt with a lot of companies and they'd never had to do that before. They never had it put into an agreement. And I said, how many multi-million-dollar companies do you work with? And he said, few, if any. I said, this is one. All right, so it mattered. So, it could be something as simple as, are we going to go with Adobe products? All right. If you're a startup company, you're probably going to go with a lot of free products or open source products. Okay. You also want to organize your site files, figure out the folder structure, etc. You're already doing some of that. You're already putting your CSS files in a CSS folder, your image files in an images folder, and pretty soon, within the next few weeks, your JavaScript files will go in a JS folder. All right. You develop and then you unit test. You test each piece individually and then you put them together to make sure they work. The big thing with testing, as said right here, somehow or other, this is on your test too, but you want to make sure you test on different browsers and different versions of browsers. There are all sorts of free emulators out there that you can use. It's not that you have to go out and buy yourself or download 10 different browsers and 8 different versions of those 10 browsers. No, there are emulators that you can use to show you how your site will look in IE6, for example. All right? Test on different screen resolutions, especially if you're going to have a mobile component to your site. Again, emulators are important here. Test using different bandwidths. I got a guy who was a student of mine. He's a farmer out in Orfordville. Was the oldest person to ever go through a program that I was in. He was 71 when he graduated. He had no desire to get another job, all right? He had his farm, but he wanted to take his farm and automate it. Plus, he did a lot of work in the community, and he started working on a lot of these communities' websites, and he started to do a lot of rewriting on them. The reason I'm telling you this is he lived on a small farm in the sticks in Orfordville, Wisconsin. He still had dial-up. So it was really good for him to test things to see how fast they did or did not come up. All right? You never know with somebody who's using your site exactly what they have or don't have. Tests from other locations. Mobile, we've already mentioned. That's the big thing. There's always a big joke that when you talk to people and you tell them how, you plan, you build, you test, and you implement. All right? And that's really boiled down. What you do this, you do this, you do this, then you go back to planning again. But the idea is that is like this. You never stop testing. This is a quote I didn't make up, but I read it once, and it's true. Every time you open up a website, whether you're a user or the developer, you're testing it. Because there's a chance you could find out something that, wow, that never happened before. Well, you better account for it. All right. So they show you here in Figure 10.6 an example of a test plan. They're going to be different based on different companies. There are tools that you can use to test, automated tools. All right. There are also, different things you can hire people to test for you if you want. You better test for accessibility. We've talked about this before. All right. We talked about this POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. We've talked about accessibility testing. You're going to hear it in virtually every class you take, every IT class you take in this program. Usability, as it says, it's the measure of the quality of the user's experience when interacting with a website. Is it usable? Does it do what I want it to do? All right? It can have real fancy, glitzy colors and text, etc., but if it doesn't do what you want it to do, people aren't going to use it. So, is it easy to learn? Is it efficient? All right? Does it have memory stuff built in? We'll talk about that in later classes, even a little bit in JavaScript. All right? If you have an error, is it easy to recover? Do you like it? That's a big thing. So testing how web page users actually use a website is called usability testing. That is a question on your next test. All right? Then you come in and you launch it. Launch it is actually making the site go live. All right? And after you've launched it, you start maintaining. And when you're maintaining, you're starting to think of, okay, what do we want to do with the next version of this site? And again, although a lot of companies don't do this, you evaluate. All right? The rest of the chapter, and there's only like 4 or 5 pages left, talk about domains and servers. This is about as hardware-oriented as we get in this class. All right? So, domain names. It used to be there was .edu, .mil, .gov, .com, .net, .org. Those are the big 6, and they still are. There wasn't really anything else. Now there's all sorts of different top-level domains, or TLDs, all right, that you can have. The domain should describe the business, but it should be brief when possible. All right. If I'm going to open up Jeff's Sporting Goods Store, jeffsportinggoodsstore.com is pretty big. All right. I might want to look for something smaller than that. You don't want hyphens if you can help it. There's more than just .com. All right. I was going to do this before class and I forgot. We've all done this before. I believe everybody in here has come in at one time or other and gone out to Amazon.com. All right. but I was going to try it to see if it was there. That's Amazon.net. No, it's not used. But a lot of times what you find is a lot of these companies is they buy, notice it also owns Amazon.org, and a lot of companies do that. All right, and there's a lot of reasons that they do it, but if you noticed, Amazon.net wasn't done. I could go and buy that domain if it's for sale, all right, and a lot of people might be confused, especially if I made it look a lot like Amazon. All right, and don't think stuff like that doesn't happen. Think about keywords. We're going to get into that in more when we talk about more about meta tags in later chapters. This is on the test. They ask what a trademark is. I guarantee this is on the test. It is a word or a phrase or a symbol or a design or some combination thereof that distinguishes one product from another. All right. I don't know if you remember, this was many years ago. All right. Coke, for a while, their motto was Coke is it. All right. For a while, that was their catchphrase. And then they had that, I like to teach the world to sing. I mean, can you imagine if Pepsi all of a sudden came up with a new campaign and said Pepsi is it? Or I'd like to teach the world to sing and people were drinking Pepsi instead of Coke, they'd probably get sued, right? Because it would be trademark infringement. Okay? Years ago, when I may have told you about this, I remember reading it online someplace. They actually showed it. There was a guy who owned a dry cleaner shop in Arizona. His last name literally and really and truly was McDonald. So he put his McDonald's sign up there, but then he put arches on it. They said it was not even 24 hours. He got a cease and desist letter from McDonald's saying if it wasn't down within 24 hours, they'd sue his ass. And typically with things like that, he has no recourse. He'd lose. All right. Know your territory. Make sure that a domain name is available. It's funny, I may have shown you this before, but I remember doing this a couple years ago when I typed in jeffscott.com. And notice that's available, so I said, okay, how about Jeffrey Paul Scott, that's my entire name, .com. All right, not reach, what does that mean? That site's available, correct? All right, but, and maybe it's not out here anymore, but maybe it was Jeffrey, I don't remember. But I went out there, and there was a guy, and I'm not making this up, he was an Elton John impersonator, and he had that domain. And the funny thing is, I karaoke, so people say, is that you? No, I'm not that fat. All right? But it was funny. He didn't look like me at all, but I had people, hey, do you have a website? No. But what people do is they go out and check by just typing that in. But when you do this, there are ways that you can flag and see when people are doing stuff like this. All right? Why? Because they buy those, I think we mentioned this before, they buy the domain and they sit on it. And if I wanted this, they'd come back and go, if you want to buy this domain from me, you can. All right? And again, I think I mentioned this, but I'll always remember that during the presidential campaign, JebBush.com. All right, if you go out there right now, notice it's even available. But for a while, it was that or something close to that. And he let it lapse, and Trump bought it. So when you went out to JebBush.com, you got pushed to Trump's website, which I thought was ingenious. All right. So registering domain names, typically it costs about $30, $40, maybe up to $50. You can register it at different companies. You can go out to GoDaddy and register a name. It doesn't have to be the company that's going to house your stuff. All right. And then web hosting, which is the last thing. A web hosting provider, they're the people who host what's called the server, which is the computer that's going to handle all the requests that come in to your website. All right. And some of them you can get almost for free. The problem is with free is a lot of times, as the saying goes, you get what you pay for. You want to look for uptime if you're going to do that. It should be up literally 99.9% of the time. And that's pretty much. Do 99.9% over 365 days, over 24 hours a day. All right? Ideally, you want 99.99999% of the time. All right? But think about it. If Amazon goes down today, if you told me that they'll lose over several million and up to $1 billion in business, I'd believe you. All right? So when you do this, there's three basic types of hosting. There's virtual hosting, which is for a small website, where you end up getting a piece of a web server that some company owns. And you basically share that server with other people. It works great for smaller companies. You can have a dedicated hosting where it's your computer, but typically it's still on the company's site. They host it for you, but it's only got your stuff on it. They maintain it, etc. And you can have co-located hosting, where it might be at the company's site, it might be at your site. All right? And the last thing that's in the chapter, because I'm done, is if you notice, there are a couple, hint, hint, test, test, that there are a couple of operating systems that are case sensitive. Unix and Linux are two of them. Linux is basically free Unix. All right? But Windows is not case dependent. Okay? So if I go into Windows and I run a command in Windows and the command is remove, RM, and I give it a file name. Even if I put RM in uppercase letters, it'll still work. Uppercase, lowercase, mixed case. But on a Unix or Linux system, it may or may not work. All right? And the last thing they show you here on page 466 in the chapter, all right, page 466, is they show you this web host checklist, if you want to look at it. Just so you know, next week we're going to go over chapters 11 and 12. You're not going to have any homework specifically from 10 or from 11 or from 12. You will get a handout after we get done with that, get done to that point. I didn't pass it out yet, but again, I do have the Chapter 10 test review. So let's take a break. It's 9:11. Let's come back at 9:25. I will email this to you right now, and we will go over it at 9:25.